Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to Of Feathers and Fiction. Sorry, my uploads have been a little bit slower lately, still kind of not feeling well and moving a little bit slower, but I finally finished doing my outline for this book, so we're going to talk about it. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about One Dark Window. Our guest is once again Miss April, my old lady. She's probably going on 5 years old now. Hey there, how you doing in there? So she's going to hang out with us today while we talk about One Dark Window. Let's get into it. But first, gotta give her her mealworms. Let's see if she wants these. April. Ooh. What's in there? Well, maybe she'll eat them, maybe not. She's probably just going to quietly sit there and do probably nothing. Yes, April. Since the weather has warmed up, my chickens will probably come over by the door. My office is right outside my front door. So if you hear roosters crowing, I have a bajillion roosters right now. So if you hear roosters crowing, there's that. And of course, I have to deal with the traffic on the road. So I apologize for the road noise, but just working with what I got. Anywho, I might break this video up into 2 parts because I have a feeling I'm going to talk about this book for much longer than what I really feel like editing at one time. It's possible I'll break this up into 2 parts. We will see. The one thing that I found really interesting about this book, let's see, how many pages is it? It's not a very long book, 392 pages. It took me so stinking long to outline it. And I think it's because I really like going through everything like chapter by chapter. I think that there wasn't a lot of like wasted chapters, if that makes sense. A lot of the other books that I've reviewed, they'll have like almost like filler chapters where something happens that doesn't really pertain to the plot. But I actually found that a lot of stuff in this book, even in some of the shorter chapters, was still pertinent to the plot line, which I think is why it took me so long to outline it. I was really pleasantly surprised. First overall kind of feelings on this book, I went into just kind of having mild expectations, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the writing style. I thought it was really like nicely written. Honestly, I really enjoyed the usage of rhyming and kind of like riddle-like usage of foreshadowing and stuff. We'll get more into that, but yeah, honestly, I really liked this book enough that I pretty much immediately went out and bought the second one, because this is probably one of the first books that I've read in a while where I was like, oh, I need to finish the series for sure. I mean, it's only 2 books. Overall, just pleasantly surprised that I liked this book as much as I did. Elspeth Spindle is our main character. She's 9 years old when the physicians show up at her aunt and uncle's house. That's where the book starts. So Elspeth is infected. In this world, there's an infection that people can get that causes them to develop magical abilities. And this magical abilities that they get, it's considered an unclean type of magic. Therefore, people who get infected and get this magical ability, they have to basically be put to death. There's a group of people called the physicians that work for the king, and the physicians have to go out and purify the world of the infected people. There is another version of magic in this world that's considered a purer form of magic, and we'll get into that. Back to Elspeth, she's 9 years old. The physicians show up at her aunt and uncle's house. Her aunt quickly finds her and gets her to exit the house as fast as possible. She tells her to run for the woods and to hide until the physicians leave. Elspeth immediately springs into action. She ends up like crawling out of a window, but then she falls and ends up like smacking her head really hard on the ground, and basically like gives herself a concussion. So she goes to get up and she can't really see straight. And so now she's panicking because she can't actually run. This is when we learn that Elspeth has this like inner voice. This voice, it's not her, it's like another entity, but she calls out to this voice. This is the first time that we see Elspeth ask this interior voice of hers for help.
Who's that? Who could it be? It's me.
Are you my conscience?
The inner voice is able to give her the energy that she needs to get to the woods, and she escapes being found by the physicians. We learn this inner voice is actually Elspeth. She has a name for it. She calls it the Nightmare. We'll learn more about why she calls it the Nightmare. So we jump back to present day. We're 11 years later. Elspeth is 20 years old now. It's her naming day, which I guess is basically like her birthday. And so she's heading into town. The town that they live in is called Blunder. And so she's heading into town to meet up with her cousin, who is coming with her to her father's house for her birthday celebrations. We get the impression that this world doesn't really get sunlight or dry weather. It seems like it's always like very overcast and rainy. So Elspeth takes a step off of the muddy road that she's on because she gets distracted by this bramble of berries, and she's like, I'm gonna grab some of those. As she steps off the road, she reaches into her pocket and she starts to hold her charm, which is a crow's foot. In this world, there's this heavy, thick mist that is like encroaching further and further into town and like further outside of town. So this mist chokes out what seems like sunlight, and it's made it really hard for these people to be able to have successful harvests. And so this town is kind of falling into, well, it's getting swallowed by the mist, which if it does is bad news for everybody. So for the average person, you have to have a charm on you. Otherwise the mist like makes you go crazy and it'll suck you into it and you'll disappear forever. And I believe how it explained that you get a charm is a charm is basically from an animal that's been found dead in the woods for some reason that protects you. We don't really dive super deep into how charms are made or whatever, which is something that I kind of wish the story jumped further into. It was still interesting and I was like, cool, okay, we have little charms, neat. After her little diversion there, she meets up with Ione, her cousin. We learn really quickly Elspeth has deep admiration for her cousin Ione. Ione has very like bright blonde hair. She's got a gap in her front teeth. She's altogether a very bubbly, optimistic individual, and Elspeth very much admires her for these character attributes because she doesn't feel like she really embodies like sunshine. So she deeply admires her cousin's gentleness and happiness, and she makes a point to talk about that. She carried an ease with her wherever she went, attracting people and animals. Even the trees seemed to sway in accordance with her step. Everyone loved her, and she loved them back, even to her own detriment. The nightmare in her head does not seem to really care for Ione all that much. It seems to me like he kind of thinks of her as a little bit of a dimwit, like not such a bright character. He says, yellow girl soft and clean, yellow girl plain, unseen, yellow girl overlooked, yellow girl won't be queen. So as the story progresses, you see that the nightmares, little riddles and rhymes that he mutters to himself inside Elspeth's head, I found them to be like they're all like foreshadowing of something, usually in the book. Nobody at this time knows that Elspeth has this nightmare in her head. She has kept this secret her entire life. Not a single soul knows. So she got infected when she was 9, but the infection didn't seem to bring forth any actual magical ability. And that is because Elspeth has not told anybody that she does have a power, she just doesn't use it. We'll get more into her actual power as the story progresses. A little bit of background. Elspeth lives with her aunt and uncle. Her aunt is really the MVP here. She's the one that really rescued Elspeth and raised her like her own daughter. Elspeth's mother died. We don't really get a lot of information on Elspeth's mom in general, which I think is like maybe it gets explained more in the second book, which I'm fine with. So I'll keep my criticism fairly low there. But Elspeth's mom and her aunt, they're sisters. When Elspeth got infected, she was currently living at her father's house as she normally would. Her father at the time was the captain of Destriers, I think is how you say it. I might have to look that up. And those people, they work for the king, and they're basically help enforce the king's law throughout the land and are largely a big part of capturing the infected and cleansing the land, so to speak. Elspeth got infected, and her father obviously found out, saw that she was getting infected, because I guess one of the signs is you get a fever and then like your veins and your hands and stuff, they turn black. Because he's the captain of Destrier, he has to, by law, kill anybody that's infected. So he couldn't kill his darling daughter, Dearest. So he decided he would rush her to her aunt's house and have her live there. So he's kept her fever and her infection a secret. So that is why Elspeth doesn't live with her father, which I think they've like lied to society and made it seem like she's been living there the whole time. but then she lives at her aunt's. That was like another part of the story that I was like, maybe we could have worked on that a little bit more, like the world building around that just a hint bit more, because like maybe we could have had an explanation of like, no, she lives with her aunt and uncle now because she just really, she's old enough now and she's working with her aunt or helping her aunt out. I don't know. We could have gotten a little bit more of an explanation there as to why she doesn't live with her father anymore, but I digress. It's not really super important, just a little bit of a nitpick. Ione and Elspeth go over to her father's house, and they're greeted by Miriam, who is Elspeth's stepmother, and then her two twin sisters. I think it's Dimia, and Naya. Those are her twin half-sisters. Her twin sisters there are like 13 years old, and Miriam is like your typical bitter stepmother. She hates Elspeth, mainly because Elspeth is like the spitting image of her mother, and Miriam knows that her husband still is in love with Elspeth's mother, even though she's gone, so she's like, she feels jealous of that, so she hates Elspeth for those things. Miriam isn't afraid to show her disdain and hatred for Elspeth. Dimia excitedly tells Elspeth that they've been invited to Equinox, which is a big celebration party at the king's residence, which is called just Stone. It's the castle, and it's just called Stone. They've been invited to the Equinox celebration, and she's like, you should come too. And Elspeth's like, nah, I don't really like parties. I kind of like keeping to myself. Something interesting happens as Elspeth is sitting there talking with Dimia. There in the darkness, growing brighter, a royal blue light, a Providence card, the well card. It looked like a sapphire beacon floating above the ground, no doubt stowed in my father's pocket. Like other Providence cards, the well was the size of any playing card, no bigger than my closed fist. It was hemmed by ancient velvet. So, in this world, remember how I told you that if you are infected, if you get the infection, the fever that brings about magic, it's considered the impure magic of this society. The purified magic that you can have access to is these things called Providence cards. This card that her father has on his person, the well card, had been my mother's dowry, worth as much gold as all of Spindlehouse. It was one of 12 different Providence cards that made up the deck. Chronicled in our ancient text, the Old Book of Alders, Providence cards were not only Blunder's greatest treasures, but also the only legal way of performing magic. Anyone could use them. All it took was a touch and intention. Clear your mind, hold a card in your hand, tap it 3 times, and the card was yours to wield. Pocket the card or place it elsewhere, the magic would still hold. 3 more taps or the touch of another person and the flow of magic would halt. But use a card too long and the consequences were dire. They were exceptionally rare Providence cards, their numbers finite. As a child, I had been afforded only glimpses at them, and I'd only ever touched one. I shivered, the feel of velvet tickling my memory. The blue light from my father's well card grew stronger. When the door opened, the light spilled into the parlor, a beacon glowing from the breast pocket of his doublet. Doublet, I think. Eric Spindle is Elspeth's father, and he has the well card. So we learn Elspeth does in fact have magic that she acquired from becoming infected. She can see the Providence cards. Or rather, the nightmare that lives in her head can see Providence cards. So the Providence cards glow. They each have their own color based off the velvet trim that they have on the card. So each card has a different color, which I kind of thought this was an interesting way to do magic. Providence cards, I think in this world there's only like 72 of them in all of existence. I kind of like the concept that each card it's not beholden to one person. Like, you steal a Providence card, it'll do your bidding no matter if you were the original owner or not. It doesn't give a rip who the owner is. There is nothing of that. I actually kind of like that. Kind of highered the stakes a little bit as to, people being able to steal your cards or take them from you if you lose a bet or whatever. I just kind of thought that was neat. I also like the fact that the magic system has consequences. So in the book, it talks about how if you own a Providence card, the more you use it, the more you might have some like physical abilities, whether you mentally start to deteriorate, you physically deteriorate. It's called degeneration. So if you use the card a lot, you usually degenerate faster. So a lot of people that have Providence cards don't live very long because their bodies start to fall apart on them. Their bodies, their minds start to fall apart. And so everybody has different side effects to using the Providence cards. So yes, her father comes up to her, he wishes her a happy birthday, and he and her don't have like the most ideal relationship. He clearly still loves her very much. He's just cautious or kind of withdrawn around her. And I think it's because, again, she's like the spitting image of her mother, and he has a hard time He's still like grieving the fact that he lost his wife. I think he also feels really guilty for sending his daughter away. And I think he also feels guilty that he married a pretty awful woman and has like 2 kind of awful daughters with her. He's described as a very severe man. However, when he sees Elspeth, he softens. And Miriam just hates that. Which is probably another reason why she hates Elspeth. Miriam pulls her aside as they're walking towards the dining hall to eat their celebratory dinner. She tells Elspeth that they've all been invited to Equinox and that her father really wants her to come this year. However, she won't be doing that. Miriam's telling her, you're not coming to Equinox because of the bullcrap you pulled 2 or 3 years ago. We're not doing this again. So apparently a couple years ago, Elspeth caught eyes with a young man named Alex and they had a little bit of fun out in the garden. But Elspeth was like, I just thought he was cute. I didn't really think anything of him. And I kind of figured I'd never see him again. So I didn't think it was a big deal. So clearly they had some type of interaction, some heated interaction, some intimate interaction. And he's like smitten with her. And so after that experience, I guess he came, or his mother came calling for Elspeth. And they had to like try and lie and explain that she wasn't there. She was there. She wasn't interested in seeing Alex again. So to avoid any further conflict in that direction, they just decided, or Miriam has just decided that Elspeth should just never go to Equinox again. She tells her, we have a happy arrangement, Elspeth. You stay away from court, quiet and out of sight, and your father pays the Hawthorns, handsomely I might add, to keep you. Keep me. Like I was a horse at my uncle's stable. I ripped my arm out of her grasp. Whatever appetite I had was gone. So she's, instead of like sticking up for herself and, just dealing with her awful stepmother, she decides to flee the house and run home. The nightmare tells her that leaving with her tail tucked is exactly what her aunt wants, but she just kind of figures this is the best way to avoid conflict. Elspeth is heading home from her naming birthday party, whatever, and she's clearly quite upset. She goes into a little bit of like some self-reflection, so we get some more background context as to what all is going on in this world. So her uncle has a Providence card. It's called the Nightmare card. She remembers when he came home with the Providence card because he was very excited about it, and I'm assuming the guy like stole it from somebody because her uncle's kind of sleazy, as we'll find out. So her uncle foolishly leaves this, her uncle's name is Tiernan, by the way, and he leaves the Nightmare card on a table. Elspeth is curious one day and she picks up the card to look at it. Here's what we figure out. Elspeth has lied to herself that she has any magic that she's acquired from the infection. Her magical ability is she's able to absorb the power of whatever card she touches. So because she picked up the Nightmare card, she ended up absorbing the nightmare into her mind. The nightmare is basically able to, through his eyes, she can see the Providence cards and she can identify what they are without seeing them because she can see the light that they give off. So she knows which one it is based off of the light it gives off. So that's her power, and she can call upon the nightmare for help, and with his inhuman strength, he's able to help her get out of a lot of situations. I knew enough of the Book of Alders to know this particular Providence card was one of only 2 of its kind. Its magic formidable, fearsome. Use it, and one had the power to speak into the minds of others. Use it too long, and the card would reveal one's darkest fears. No matter how many times Elspeth is asked, she cannot get the nightmare to reveal who he is, where he came from, what he is. So he has all of his identity is like a secret. So she's got this like mystery that lives inside her mind, this creature, this beast, this monster that lives inside her mind. And she has like no idea what he is, where he came from, any of that stuff. As she's on her way home from her father's, she gets apprehended by these 2 highwaymen, and they have their knives out and she thinks she's gonna die. Instead of surrendering, she decides she's gonna call in the nightmare for help because they think that she has a Providence card on her and she doesn't. I think that they have intel that her uncle has a Providence card. So they ask her, where's the card, blah, blah, blah. She's like, I don't know. I don't have it. I'm just a maid. I just work there. I don't know what you're talking about. So she lies about it. And then she calls on the nightmare for help, and he helps her kick the tar out of these guys. And she escapes them and gets back home. Back at the Hawthorns' house, her aunt and uncle, their last name is Hawthorn. She asks the nightmare, like, why does your magic hurt and burn so much when I use it? And he says, my magic moves. He said, my magic bites. My magic soothes. My magic frights. You are young and not so bold. I am unflinching 500 years old. So we're getting clues that this guy is like a very ancient entity. We just don't know what he is. A messenger arrives at the Hawthorns' house, extending an invitation to the family to come to Equinox. So Elspeth is like, crap, I guess I'm going to this. Her uncle seems really pleased by this invitation, but her aunt her aunt's name is Opal, reminds him that they're still behind from last year's tax season. So Talkin' Town is at the heart. This is like one of the worst harvests they've ever had. So there's not a lot of extra cash to be spent at this time. Her uncle then says they're going to Equinox because he's going to use the Nightmare card as payment for what they're behind on. The Nightmare card, my aunt said. She looked back up at my uncle, the color in her cheeks gone. Kings of Blunder have sought this card longer than I've been alive, Tyrn. How on earth did you get it? I pinched it off a highwayman on the forest road years ago. And you didn't think to tell me? My uncle cast his wife a weary look. I've been saving it. His eyes flickered to Ione. For a rainy day. Sinister stuff here. Oh, honey, you're sitting like on the very edge there. Why don't you sit like this? So we go back in time a little bit, again, to get some context of what these Providence cards are and where they came from. We learn that there is this book called the Old Book of Alders or whatever, and it's kind of like almost like their religious text, if you will. I'm going to consult my notes here a little bit because there was just a lot of information dumped on us in this chapter. Her aunt or her mother tells her that to answer the question of where the Providence cards came from, they must look to the Spirit of the Wood. The Shepherd King's description of the Spirit of the Wood was the sort of thing that made my childish imagination run wild with terror. An ageless deity smelling of magic, of salt, that lurked invisible in the mist. So long ago, the Spirit of the Wood was their divinity. And the people of Blunder sought her out for blessings and approvals and gifts. So they honored her woods by taking the names of the trees as their own. Hence, like, you have the hawthorns, that's a tree. You've got the spindle, that's a tree. The king, his royal last name is Rowan, that's also a tree, etc., etc. So the Spirit of the Wood granted the Shepherd King strange, powerful magic. So he wanted to share this magic with the kingdom, so he created the Providence cards. But everything has a price. So for each card, the Shepherd King had to give something up to the Spirit of the Wood. So with the Shepherd King's Providence cards, people had magic at their fingertips. People were no longer going to the Spirit of the Wood to beg her for blessings. So as a result, the Spirit of the Wood created the mist, isolating Blunder from the neighboring kingdoms. And children exposed to too much of the mist became infected. Those who survived the fever often carried like the magical gifts like the spirit used to bestow, only more unruly and dangerous, which is why it was considered the like impure magic. To lift the mist, the Shepherd King sought out the spirit. When he returned, he wrote the Book of Alders, which is like kind of what everybody uses in reference to know anything about the Providence cards, but it's almost considered kind of like not a religious text, but almost like a legend, so people don't even take it that seriously. The Book of Alders outlines the dangers of magic and how to safeguard oneself in the mist by using the charm that we mentioned earlier. Remember Elspeth's little crowfoot charm? Ultimately, what's going on in this world is the king wants to lift the mist because it's going to eventually kill everybody. It's going to wipe everybody out eventually. If you unite all 12 Providence cards, and then use the blood of an infected person, the whole earth will be healed and Blunder will be free of the mist. So the Shepherd King was trying to purify the world of the mist that the Spirit of the Wood started to put out because she was mad at him for messing up the Providence cards and making it so that way nobody came to her for magic, but they went to him, yada, yada, yada. I hope everybody's tracking with me here. It's kind of a lot. This is another tidbit that gets, thrown at us. The Shepherd King had made it was 78, not 72. 78 Providence cards in descending order. There were 12 black horses held exclusively for the King's elite guard, the Destriers, 11 golden eagles, 10 prophets, 9 white eagles, 8 maidens, 7 chalices, 6 wells, 5 iron gates, 4 scythes, 3 mirrors, 2 nightmares, and 1 twin alders. That's the big bad boy. That's the one that everybody, lusts after. There's a little bit of background information. We're jumping back to current day. We're heading to Stone, aka the King's Castle, for Equinox. Uncle Tyrn, Elspeth's uncle, he is like giddy with excitement, and the nightmare inside Elspeth's head, the one that she absorbed out of the nightmare card that her uncle has, he just kind of regards her uncle with disdain. The hawthorn tree carries few seeds. Its branches are weary, it's lost all its leaves. Be wary the man who bargains and thieves, he'll offer your soul to get what he needs. Ione tells Elspeth that the plan all along here is that Uncle Tyrion is going to basically sell the Nightmare card to King Rowan because he needs it to unite the deck. As a result, he's hoping to use the Nightmare card as a bargaining tool to then get the king to agree to allowing Ione and Prince Hoth to get engaged. Elspeth is like not on board with, because Prince Hoth is known for being a brutal jerk who is awful to everyone and everything. Not a great guy. So Elspeth tells her like, hey, that doesn't sound like a very good deal to me. Like I don't want you with an abusive man. Come on. Ione, however, because she's very optimistic and maybe a little bit delusional, is like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be great. Aren't you happy for me? Like, I have such a great life ready for me. You good, girl? Ione doesn't even seem to take these rumors that she's heard about Hoth. She's like, no, I think he's very misunderstood. He has to be a good man. And Elspeth is like, I really wish that you would not be super naive and maybe not so trusting, because he's, from what I've seen and heard, is just not a great guy at all. Anyway, so after this little argument between Elspeth and Ione, Ione is ticked off and she goes stomping off. She's like, I can't believe Elspeth is just this bitter, distrusting, disillusioned girl. Like, bleh, raining on my parade. Elspeth feels a little bit bad and she's like, crap, I'm gonna have to try and make amends with Ione later. They reach the castle and Elspeth greets her father and her family, and they agree that Elspeth will stay with her family in their room. That's not to raise suspicion, because remember, everybody's supposed to have believed that Elspeth has been living with her father this entire time. On her way to her room, she runs into Alex Laburnum. So Alex is the guy that she, kind of had a little thing with 3 years ago, and apparently he has, not forgotten about her. So she sees him, and she's like, shit, I muttered. The nightmare groaned. Elspeth, Alex said, hurrying toward me. I thought I saw you earlier, but I feared I had dreamed you up from wishing too greatly. And I first read this, I was like, oh no, not this kind of character. He invites her to sit with him at the dinner, and she quickly declines and rushes off. She takes a big chug of her wine, trying to steady her nerves, and gets approached by another young man. She quickly warms him. She finds him kind of charming and feels kind of drawn to him. So she nearly chokes on her wine when she realizes this young man that she's speaking to is Emery Yu, which would be the king's nephew. Now she's suddenly feeling kind of tense about that, and so she tries to dismiss herself, and Emery offers to walk her outside to get some fresh air because she's kind of all lightheaded, and so she hesitantly takes his arm and lets him lead her off through the crowd. Elspeth says she's going to go back to her room. She's like, I don't really need any help getting back to my room. I'm good, thank you. Tries to dismiss herself. He's starting to act kind of weird with her now. She assumes that maybe he's a little intoxicated, but his mannerisms are getting strange, and she's afraid that he's going to push her over the banister.
This is Sparta!
Because he has a hold of her arm, and he says to her, I see you, Elspeth Spindle. His voice was near and far at once, as if underwater. I see a pretty maiden with long dark hair and charcoal eyes. I see a yellow gaze narrowed by hate. I see darkness and shadow, his lips twisted in an eerie smile. And I see your fingers, long and pale, covered in blood. This is foreshadowing. And she's like, what the heck? How does this kid know about the fact that I have the nightmare in my head and it has yellow eyes? Before she can call a nightmare for help, because she's like, I need to get out of this. I need to break free from his grip. Emery's grip is broken, and he's shoved down the stairs by another man dressed in black. This man turns to Elspeth and apologizes for his brother's inexcusable behavior. She's a bit at loss for words because she realizes this young man is Raven Yu, the king's eldest nephew and the captain of the Destroyers. The Destroyers. Help me. I don't know how to pronounce this word. Destroyer. He's the captain of Destroyers.
Destroyer. Also Destroyer.
Whatever. Why do we have two pronunciations of the same freaking word? So Raven Yu is the current captain. Hello, I thought I paused you. Okay, so he's the current captain of Destroyers. And he's not, he's pretty easy on the eyes, if you know what I mean. Elspeth is kind of taken off guard by him, and she's a little bit, at a loss for words because he's very good looking.
Blah, blah, blah. Proper name, place name, backstory stuff.
Like his younger brother, his eyes were gray and stood out brilliantly against smooth copper skin. He watched me down a long, formidable nose, his eyes searching my face. I immediately felt very connected and intrigued by Raven because The author makes a point multiple times throughout the book to mention his nose. Like, that's a prominent feature. And as a big nose girly, I really love when I see like people with larger noses featured in books as attractive, because I get really sick and tired of just like the plastic surgery looking perfect noses. I don't know why we've demonized people with unique noses, because I mean, look at my schnoz. I used to hate my nose as a kid growing up. I got picked on for it, and I hated my nose for a really, really, really long time. It wasn't until I got older that I was like, I actually like the fact that I don't have a cookie cutter nose, and I have something that makes me look a little bit more different. So I was like, yay, he has a prominent nose. They end up introducing each other because she's never officially met Raven. He's never met her, but he knows who she is now because her father was the previous captain. Raven says to her, I also know Eric only has 2 daughters living at Spindle House. Why do you not live with your family, Miss Spindle? I tucked a loose hair behind my ear. I don't see how that's any of your business. So, okay, Raven's not stupid. He knows. And he questions it. He doesn't dig any further into this like very small, quick interaction they have between each other. And Elspeth dismisses herself. Raven, because he's a gentleman, he does escort her back to the spindle room. And now we're into chapter 5. Good job, me. It's almost been an hour and I'm 5 chapters in. Good job. Elspeth is woken up the next morning frightfully by her creepy little weird sisters, who are curious to know why she left the festivities the night before with Emery Yu, because everybody's like, oh, scandalous, she went off and did the dirty. And so they're like pestering her with questions, knowing Emery's reputation for being a sick, drunk. He's sick, drunk, and weird is like his reputation in the court. In the town, his reputation. Apparently, Emery has been living at Stone for the last 2 years, so the king can keep a better rein on his nasty temper. That's the excuse that we're given. This day of the equinox celebration, all the men go out to hunt, and all the ladies get dressed and go walk through a garden. Very standard gender roles, you know? Her stepmother and her half-sisters abandon her as soon as they get down to the garden area, and she's like, thank God, I don't want to be around them at all anyway. Elspeth is missing Ione, and she wants to try and find her to see if they can, you know, make amends from their argument that they had the day before. But she can't find her. She starts to kind of second guess herself and wonders, maybe I am too distrustful, maybe I am a little bit too pessimistic, maybe I could learn something from Ione and actually be a little bit more trusting and charismatic. But I feel like in this world you probably shouldn't be, because I think that there's too many sinister individuals around. She doesn't find Ione, but she does find her Aunt Opal, and so she runs up to her and gives her a hug, and they start chatting away. And she ends up asking Opal about Emery Yu, because she's suspicious of Emery, that he's another person that survived the fever and has magical abilities, so technically he's an infected kid. She's like, I am suspicious of him because he was able to like see into my mind. Like, that's not normal. So she wonders if Emery is also infected. And her aunt's like, I couldn't say, I don't really know. And she's like, well, my father, who's the captain of the Destroyers, he let me live, so who's to say that like more infected kids haven't been allowed to live? Opal tells her, well, your magic never manifested, that's why you were allowed to live. But Elspeth is like, well, I knew about that. I do have magic. And just then, as she's thinking this, she is blinded by a pink light. Blinded by the light. Blinded by the light. So it's Ione, and she's bathed in the pink light of the Maiden card. Dun, dun, dun. Then the Nightmare finds this development rather interesting, because he says, then perhaps the Maiden card is merely part of a much larger sum. So Elspeth is relieved because Ione appears the same as she did before. So the Maiden card grants you like inhuman beauty. Like, it just makes you an absolute bombshell if you use the magic. So she has the Maiden card on her person. Elspeth can see the glow from the Maiden card. However, Ione's appearance hasn't changed at all, so she knows that she hasn't used it. The Nightmare tells her, yet. She hasn't used it yet. Elspeth rushes up to Ione and she tells her, like, I've been looking around for you all over the place. Ione lies to her and says that, oh, I've just been wandering around the castle. That's where I've been this whole time. Even though you couldn't find me the night before and you couldn't find me earlier today. Like, I've just been wandering by myself, you know, no biggie. And Elspeth's kind of like, okay, this is like kind of strange for her to be acting this way. It's clear that the anger from the argument they had the day before has not diminished. So Elspeth pulls Ione aside and she calls her out. You met with Prince Hoth, didn't you? She prickled. I told you I would, didn't I? You never told me there would be a maiden card involved. How do you know about the maiden card? But Elspeth asks if Hoth gave the maiden card to Ione, and she says, I can't understand why you hate the Rowans so much, Elspeth. Hoth has 500 years of legacy hoisted upon him. He needs support and understanding, not blind resentment. Her voice, so soft, had hardened. Or can you only think of yourself? And I was like, girl, calm down. And the nightmare chimes in with, the berry of Rowans is red, always red. The earth at its trunk is dark with blood shed. No water nor cloth can lessen its spread. He'll ask for a maiden, then turn her heart dead. Elspeth doesn't explain to Ione how she knows that she has a maiden card, because obviously that would give away the fact that she's truly infected and has magical abilities. So she tells her, she urges her, like, please don't use the maiden card. You are perfect as you are. Ione tells her, like, girl, I love you dearly. However, you need to let me make my own decisions and my own choices. So basically, back off. And then Ione walks off to do her own thing. So Elspeth is distraught. She walks through the garden, pushes deeper into the, I guess it's a pretty big garden. She pushes deeper into the garden. It kind of heads out towards the woods. And so she goes into the woods and she goes up to a tree and she sits down. She's crying about Ione. You know, if Ione uses the maiden card, she will not only become like physically beautiful, but she'll also become a different person. She'll become very cold-hearted and distant, and that's just like what the maiden card does to you. As she's sitting there having a little sob fest, she is interrupted by Raven Yu. Her gaze doesn't linger for very long on his face, because remember, she finds him quite attractive, but she notices a color of light radiating from his breast pocket. Was it burgundy? A burgundy light, and that is the color of the nightmare card. So Raven has the second nightmare card. Chapter 6, Raven notices that Elspeth is a little bit beat up from, I guess, like, to get out to the woods, she walked through all the roses, and so her hands and stuff are all torn up from the roses that she pushed through in the garden. He asks to inspect them, and she allows him to, and I was like, we love a man that asks for consent before he touches you or does anything to you. He's really gentle as he examines her hands, and then he suddenly asks, why were you on the forest road alone at night 15 days past? So she's like, what the heck? How do you know that? And then she recognizes the dagger that he has on his person. It's like an ivory hilted dagger, and she recognizes that as the one that was held to her throat when she was apprehended by those highwaymen. She puts two and two together. It turns out that Raven Yu was actually one of those highwaymen, and she's like, what were you doing? What were you doing on the road 15 days past? Captain of the Destroyers, whatever the heck. I'm gonna have a hard time with this word. So she realizes that she attacked him, the captain of Destroyers, and that's like a punishable offense, usually resulting in death. The nightmare chimes in that she also needs to be aware that he was trying to steal a Providence card, and that is also a crime punishable by death. So yeah, apparently in this world, like, you're not allowed to steal other people's Providence cards. It's like a big no-no. She lies. She tells him, I have no idea what you're talking about. I was not on the road 15 days ago. Raven raised his dark brows. Yours isn't a face I'd soon forget, Miss Spindle. When he asked the question a second time, there was an edge to his voice. What were you doing on the forest road? Elspeth assumes he's going to arrest her, and so she makes a run for it. She's like, I'm booking it. And she asks the nightmare for help, and he gives her like that inhuman speed to get away from Raven. Raven obviously tears off after her too, and so they're booking it through the mist. She gets hit with a smell of salt in her nose and her eyes and her ears. Like, all of the orifices in her face are getting hit with like salt. That sensation makes her cough and gasp frantically, so they're getting like deeper and deeper into the mist. In her head, she suddenly hears another deep voice that doesn't belong to the nightmare. It says, wait, Elspeth Spindle, I'm not going to hurt you. So it turns out it's Raven's voice, because remember, the nightmare card gives you the ability to intrude in on other people's minds. So he's using the nightmare card to speak into her mind to tell her, like, I'm not going to hurt you, please stop running. This, of course, causes her to trip and fall. And Raven, like, catches up with her, and he slides down on the ground next to her, covering her mouth with his hand. He tells her to stay quiet because the sound of baying hunting hounds is coming closer. So the king and all the men are coming back from the hunt. Catching these two together out in the field away from everybody is a little bit suspicious, especially the captain of Destroyers. So he's like trying to get her to shut up so they don't get caught. Still using the nightmare's strength, she ends up like kicking him in the face and the chest, ends up breaking his nose. She's tempted to call out for help from the king and the men that are approaching, but the nightmare reminds her that the king is not a friend. She looks down and her arms are now bare because her sleeves have been pushed up. And Raven has noticed that she has dark veins in her arms. So she yanks her arms away from him, and he tells her again, I'm not going to hurt you, he repeated. You, on the other hand, he wiped his bloody nostrils on his sleeve, wincing. He pinched the bridge of his nose. That's twice you've handed me my ass and run off. She's livid with him for using the nightmare card to speak into her mind. Because remember, the main reason why she's so ticked off about this intrusion is that if he gets in her mind, that could potentially reveal the fact that she has the nightmare living inside her mind, and that's a secret she's kept for like over half her life now at this point, and nobody knows about it. And if she gets caught, that's a death sentence for her. He reiterates again, he's not going to kill her or arrest her, but they need to get inside somewhere for him to be able to talk to her kind of privately. And then she asks him, did he hear anything inside her head when he was in there? And he said nothing. He said just a faint noise, a tapping or a clicking. Why do you ask? And so the nightmare, the one thing I kind of like about this book is that the nightmare's like trademark thing that he does is he's always like clicking his claws together. And I just like the imagery. It kind of gives a little bit of an unhinged kind of mad scientist kind of vibe to the nightmare. So she tells him, I do not give you permission to ever use that nightmare card on my head again. You hear me? Like, you stay out of my mind. He retorts and tells her, like, I wouldn't have needed to use the nightmare card if you just would have stopped when I told you to listen to me. He's like, we were like in legitimate danger of getting caught by the king and all of his men. He tells her he won't use it again on her unless obviously he has her permission, and urges her to follow him back to the castle. Chapter 7. Elspeth very reluctantly follows Raven back to the castle, and she's absolutely petrified he's lying, he's going to take her to the dungeon. So the dungeon in this book is known as like where all the infected children get taken and like really bad things happen to them. It's got a pretty bad reputation. So she's just terrified he's going to turn on her and turn her in. I didn't realize I'd stopped walking until Raven cleared his throat, halting a few paces ahead. He must have seen the terror on my face because for a moment, the firmness around his eyes softened. He glanced down the stairwell. I'll never take you there, Miss Spindle. You have my word. I do like the fact that, again, I'm really big on when we're trying to create a relationship between two characters, like a romantic interest. I like when authors include somebody noticing someone's physical reactions to things because it makes, again, the connection between the two of them so much stronger. Raven very much is very observant of Elspeth's body language and her reactions to things, and his features soften and he gentles his tone to try and get her to calm down and realize that he's not going to hurt her. So I very much appreciate that. What are you doing? Hi. Hello, Miss April. Oh, you're very cute. Look at her fluffy butt. Look at the little fluffy tush. Look at your fluffy butt. Oh, it's so fluffy. Raven takes her into this room, and there's like these two hounds that live in the room, and they lash out viciously at Elspeth as they come into the room. And Raven's a little bit surprised by this reaction because these dogs don't normally react much at all to anything. And so it says the nightmare like hisses inside her head at the sight of the hounds, and then she tells him like animals don't like me. So we learned that early on too. Like that's like a big thing is that Elspeth does not, like, all animals are terrified of her because of the nightmare in her head. They can like sense him. And so she doesn't have any like healthy interactions with animals at any point. Elspeth is brought into the room. Raven tells her to stay there and he leaves her there alone with these two dogs for a few minutes. Thankfully, he commanded the dogs to stand down and they listened to him. So while they're sitting there in the silence by themselves in the room, the nightmare tells her that she should probably just admit to the fact that she can see these Providence cards because, you never know, Raven might surprise her and might not be a bad guy. And she reminds him that not all surprises are good. So again, Elspeth is just doesn't trust anybody. I think for good reason. She hears people approaching from down the hallway, and then 3 people file into the room. The one is a woman, and that is Raven's sister, Jesper. She's also the only female destrier in the kingdom. And then the 3rd stranger is a physician, and she's instantly ticked off. The physician's name is Philip, and he assures her that he's not going to do anything to her. No ill intent is meant towards her, but he does have some questions for her. He asks her what her magical abilities are that the infection granted her. Because remember, Raven saw her veins in her arms back in the field, so he for sure knows now, like, she's for sure been infected. A spark flickered through my mind. There was a way to lie and tell the truth at the same time. That's how the best lies are told, with just a sliver of truth. I was like, thank God we have a more discerning and calculating female character in a book. I saw somebody write in a review that Elspeth annoyed them, and to be honest, like, I found Elspeth a pretty regular, actually a pretty normal average character. I can't really think of any way that she annoyed me, to be honest. She's distrustful and disillusioned by people, but for good reason. She's infected. If people find out she's infected, she's going to get axed. And so as a result, like, she's largely an introverted individual. She's got the nightmare that lives inside her head, and he's always like chiming in on things and interrupting her thoughts. To me, I'm like, I don't understand the hate there. I actually found her to be a pretty darn good female main character compared to the whole slew of the other basic characters that we've read that are described as being really intelligent, but then end up not being intelligent in the slightest. I found Elspeth a breath of fresh air, to be honest with you. I did not think she was a bad FMC by any means. She decides, I'll tell these people that I can see the colors of Providence cards, that I can identify cards without seeing them physically. I can just see the light that they give off and I can identify them. That's at least telling half the truth, and I won't tell them that the reason why I can see that is because of the nightmare. He's ultimately the one that can see the cards. She tells them, every card has a color, like a magical signature, I said. The color corresponds with the velvet on the card's edge. A black horse is black, a well is blue, a maiden is pink, and so on. Jesper is very excited by this revelation, but Philip reminds everyone that magic comes with a cost. So if she's had this power for 11 years, she should have signs of degeneration by now. And then Elspeth is like, well, if I am degenerating, I don't know what that is. It's not apparent to me. Suddenly, another individual walks into the room, and that is Prince Renelm. Renelm, I think is how you would say his name. This is the king's youngest son. And Elspeth immediately is like, whoa. And the nightmare also has a visceral reaction. He like snarls at the sight of the prince. Elspeth understands the nightmare's hatred for the Rowans. The Rowans used the ancient wisdom of the old Book of Alders to instill fear of magic. He corrupted the ancient text, defiled it, in order to control Blunder. So the Rowan's lineage is like not great. They're just bad people all around. All 4 of the Scythe cards belong to the Rowans, and the Scythe card gives the ultimate power of persuasion. Prince Renelm, he can manipulate and abuse anybody he wants with the Scythe card. It makes him a pretty big threat. Well, his name's Prince Renelm, but we just call him Elm, which I think is also a tree. Then we come to learn that Elm is the second highwayman that attacked her on the roads. She's like, I am not down to hand jive. I am really irritated by the fact that you 2 bastards attacked me. She tells Raven, like, I'm not speaking anymore until Elm gets out of this room. I appreciate she has a tenacity to stick up for herself when she wants to without it coming off as try hard. Normally she will run from conflict, but she will stand up for herself when need be, and she's firm about it. She doesn't resort to like dumb threats or whatever. She's just like, you won't be able to force me to do anything else with that man in this room. And I'm like, okay, cool. Chapter 8, Raven puts Elspeth's power to the test. I think he makes everybody else leave the room because she's understandably freaked out by this audience. She's able, like I said, to identify all the cards successfully. And he's like, can we up the stakes a little bit? Can I blindfold you? And can you still see the light that the cards give off? And so he blindfolds her, and then she's still able to tell every single card color based off of, even through the blindfold. A little bit of context for some more of the cards. The Black Horse made its beholder a master of combat. The Golden Egg granted great wealth. The Prophet offered glimpses of the future. The White Eagle bestowed courage. The Maiden bequeathed great beauty. The Chalice turned liquid into truth serum. The Well gave clear sight to recognize one's enemies. The Iron Gate offered blissful serenity no matter the struggle. The Scythe gave its beholder the power to control others. The Mirror granted invisibility. The Nightmare allowed its user to speak into the minds of others. The Twin Alders had the power to commune with Blunder's ancient entity, the Spirit of the Wood. Raven asks if she has any cards herself that she keeps on her person. And she's like, nope, heck to the no. I do not keep any cards on me. Because remember, if she touches another card, she absorbs its magic. So she hasn't ever touched another card. I don't even know if she's been around another card to touch it, but like she refuses to touch another card because she's like, I'm not sure if I'll absorb every single card that I touch, but that's her assumption of the magic that she has. She points out to Raven, like, I don't carry a card on me, which I find interesting that you're asking me this right now because you seem to think that I had a card on me, which is why you attacked me on the road. So what's up with that? Why are you asking me this? He doesn't answer her, and he asks how many other people know about her infection. And so she takes the blindfold off of her face to study his, to be able to look him in the eye, and he appears to only be curious. So he's not like antagonizing her or accusing her. He's just trying to like figure her out. She asks him like, why would I tell you who else knows about my infection when you could put whoever was harboring me to death for that, because that's a large offense. He says that she won't know for sure, but he hasn't arrested her yet, and that he's merely trying to understand her situations. They go back and forth. They ask each other questions and they won't answer them. And so she's like, well, it's strange that you say this. Why haven't you arrested me yet? Because I have grievously broken the law. He tells her, like, not everybody sees her existence as a punishable offense. Raven then asks if anybody knows of her abilities. And she truthfully admits that no one else knows. Like, he's the first person ever to learn that she has this ability. Raven is, you know, captain of Destroyer by day, and he's highwayman by night. Jesper, Elm, and Philic, that physician. These guys, they're all in cahoots against the king. Because remember, the king is trying to unite the deck of cards, the 12 that he needs to unite the deck cards. He's trying to unite the deck. And so Raven and Elm and his crew, they're also trying to unite the card before the king. Raven is trying to find all the Providence cards. And this is because Emery, his younger brother that we met earlier, he's kept at Stone because he's infected. He was kept alive because in order to unite the deck of 12 cards, you have to also use infected blood in order to unite the cards. The king has kept Emery alive because he's going to sacrifice Emery to unite the deck. And so Raven wants to save Emery, understandably, because that's his brother. So he's like, I have to beat the king at his game. So it also turns out who is infected blood is Raven gonna use if they unite the deck before the king does, because they're trying to save Emery. Well, it turns out that the king's head physician, the guy's name is Orith Willow. Orith Willow is also an infected individual, and the king kept him alive because Orith's magic ability is to be able to identify the infected people through this like claw thing that he has, and he dips it in someone's blood and is like, they for sure are infected. Now I'm a little bit confused by this part of the story because apparently you can tell someone's infected by the fact that their veins turn black. So I'm not really 100% sure why Orith's power is like so noteworthy, because it's like clear to the naked eye when someone's infected. So they're going to try to do a switcheroo. So Raven is going to use Orith Willow's blood as a sacrifice to unite the deck. And then once the deck is united and the mist is cleared and the infection is purified, that'll save Emery. So that's what's going on here. Catch everybody up to speed. Elspeth is like, I'll make a deal with you. I'll help you find the Providence cards. She won't tell anyone that she knows that the prince and Raven are undercover highwaymen. She'll keep that part of their identity a secret and their mission a secret. In turn, Raven will keep her whole stuff secret. And then one last thing, she makes Raven promise that he will never use the nightmare card on her again. Chapter 9. We're back in the Great Hall for another feast, and Elm ends up escorting Raven into the hall. The nightmare tells her to be wary of him because he's a Rowan and they're not to be trusted. Initially, I had my suspicions towards Elm. I wasn't sure how I felt about him, but and I haven't read the second book yet, but it seems like Elm is actually like a trustworthy character, even though he's very distrusting of Elspeth the entire book, but there's something kind of likable about him. Alex approaches Elspeth again, which she's like, ugh, get me out of here. And he tells her like, Elspeth, I got your father's consent for you to sit with me at dinner time, so come join me. Elspeth and the nightmare are not agreeable to this arrangement at all. Neither of them like this Alex kid. He sounds insufferable. Her gaze shifts over Alex's shoulder, and then she notices Raven. Drawn by my gaze, Raven turned his head. His eyes captured mine, falling a moment to my dress before shifting to Alex. For the briefest moments, I thought I saw the corner of his lips curl. Raven, help her! Immediately, she is pleading for help. Thank God, Raven takes the hint, and he butts into their conversation, asking if they're enjoying the equinox. She says, as best I can, I said, my voice thinner than I liked. Then for spite, though there are far too many Destryers here for my liking. Raven cocked a brow. Do you have something against Destryers, Miss Spindle? Not all of them. I searched his face when I noted the bruise along his cheekbone where I'd kicked him earlier. A small smile of my own slid across my mouth. But most. And I just had to say, I really felt like this author nailed the banter between characters very well. There's been times where I've read books where I'm like, I see that the author is trying to have banter between characters, but they are not executing it well at all. And I think this author has good banter back and forth. They have an interaction that they shared before that turns into like an inside joke, and they're able to tease one another based off of that. I was like, this is fun. It's like legitimately believable to me. I very much appreciated the banter. Alex is not pleased with seeing these two interact because they seem a little bit chummy, and Alex is like, I don't like that. He's feeling inadequate, and then he tries to turn the attention back on himself. And I think he like grabs her arm or something and like kind of tugs her towards him. And he's like, come on, Elspeth, we gotta go sit down now. Elspeth once again denies his invite and says that she has already agreed to sit with the U's at the table. And Alex is like, wah! Alex pressed his hand over mine, trapping it against his arm. No, I have your father's permission, Elspeth. But not mine, I said, more forceful this time. Now, if you please, unhand me! Alex goes to protest, and Raven flashes him like a pretty, like, dangerous glance, like, don't you dare open your mouth, shut up, and respect this woman's wishes. Yay. So Raven instead offers her his arm, and then he whisks her off to go sit down with the rest of his family. Prince Hoth comes into the hall, and he announces that they are closer to achieving their goal of uniting the deck of cards, because he says, tonight, he declared, thanks to his generous contribution, my father has knighted Tyrion Hawthorne. We are proud to offer his daughter a place in our royal family. Then Hoth presents the Nightmare card and his future wife, Ione Hawthorne. Chapter 10, Elspeth can't take her eyes off Ione because it is clear that unfortunately, Ione has been channeling the Maiden card, and her whole entire physique is now completely flawless. At this revelation, Raven asks why she didn't tell him that her uncle had the Nightmare card. As if freed from a blindfold, my eyes opened. You lied to me, I said, the heavy weight of dread filling my chest. Why would the king want my uncle's Nightmare card if his own captain already possessed one? My breath whooshed out of me. Unless he does not know. So the Nightmare is thrilled at this reveal that Raven is like a conniving traitor. Raven, very in like a hushed tone, tells her to keep her voice down because of the company that they're in. You know, this is kind of sensitive information. Elspeth tells him that if he truly wants her to help him, he needs to be forthcoming about the situation and what's going on. They leave the table separately, not to draw attention to themselves, because, you know, everybody's scoping everybody out at such occasion as this. So they both leave, they stagger how they leave in order to go talk privately. Raven ends up taking her to his chamber, which I kind of thought it was funny. His room is described as like an absolute mess, which is a juxtaposition of like who he is as a person. In person, he's clean cut, he's put together, he's stern, and his room is like a disheveled mess. He uses the Nightmare card to contact the rest of his group, you know, and tell them that they need to have a little meeting. While he's sitting there mind speaking to his people, the Nightmare and Elspeth have a little bit of argument between each other, and they bicker back and forth about why Raven would keep the fact that he has the second Nightmare card a secret. Perhaps he has a plausible reason, perhaps not. Raven then tells her he's summoned his family and they're going to meet in the cellar. So Elspeth is about to open the door to head out into the hallway, but he stops her upon hearing voices in the hallway. He places his finger over her lips to like keep her quiet. I inhaled abruptly, my lips parting against the skin of his finger. Raven lowered his gaze to my mouth. His finger slipped off my lips, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting glance before he looked back at the door. And though it was too dark to be certain, I thought I saw a flush slide up his neck. So it's pretty clear these two like each other pretty much right from the beginning. But I feel like these brief moments of interaction between each other help build the fact that they are attracted to each other without it just being like instantaneous. Some people could again argue like it's a bit of an insta-love situation, but so he, shushes her. And the men in the hallway were physicians, and they overhear them actually discussing Emery and how they need to sedate him more heavily and to not tell the captain. Raven has to be somewhat conscientious of the fact that his brother's probably being abused in some way, shape, or form. This is why he's so desperate to save Emery and get him out of his uncle's clutches. Elspeth asks Raven if one of the physicians that they hear out in the hallway, if that was Orith Willow, and Raven asks, like, do you know him? It's odd that you would know his name. She tells him that he was the physician that came to her aunt and uncle's house when she was a kid, and that she was able to hide from him, so he never got a chance to test her blood to find out if she was infected. Raven looked down at me, some of the strain gone from his features. He slid his hand away from mine atop the latch, his warm, calloused thumb snagging over my knuckles. It was meant as a gesture of comfort, a quiet acknowledgement of my fear, and it was. And I was like, again, I appreciate he notices her discomfort and offers her like a slight reprieve. I like the gentleness of it. So Raven goes over to his wardrobe and he pulls another card out, and this one is the mirror. And out of all the cards that exist, the mirror apparently frightens Elspeth the most, or it frightened her most as a child. And she backs into the door, afraid to be near it at all, because the mirror grants invisibility to the user. So she's like, I don't want to absorb that. When Raven's eyes meet hers, he's like, what's wrong? I stared at the mirror card in his hand. Are you going to use that? It's for you. Air whooshed out of my open mouth, and I shoved my hands deep into my pockets. I can't, I said too quickly. Raven cocked a brow. Trust me, you want to avoid Orith. So he was going to give her the mirror card for her to stay invisible to avoid Orith, but she's like, no go. Not touching that thing. The nightmare urges her that now is the time to reveal her magical ability as being able to absorb the power of cards. She tells him no because Raven will want to know the rest and potentially find out about the nightmare in her head. And she's like, I gotta keep the nightmare a secret. The nightmare, however, doesn't think that this revelation of him living inside her head would be a bad thing. Elspeth tells Raven that magic comes at a price, and she won't take unnecessary risks when the cards are involved. So instead of pushing or forcing her to use the card, Raven respects her wishes, and he uses the card to keep himself invisible as he's supposed to be monitoring the crowd for the evening. And, he had said he's gallivanting off with her. Elspeth can still see the card's colors, so she's able to follow him through the castle. She's following after him. They reach the bottom of the stairwell. Raven comes to an abrupt halt, which causes Elspeth to smack hard into his back just when she's about to ask him what the heck is wrong and why he stopped. Miriam pops into the stairwell, and she's kind of drunk, and she tells her that she saw her leave with Raven, and that she doesn't care who she chooses to sully her reputation with, so long as it's not the captain of Destroyers, because what if he finds out she's infected? Miriam, in her drunken state, and her tongue's a little looser, tells her that she's just like her mother, strange, fevered, odd, infected. Oh, I guess that's what it was. I guess her mom was infected, and then maybe her mom was killed because she was infected. I actually don't remember if that was explained much at all. Elspeth, she understands her aunt is drunk, or her stepmother is drunk. The words still hurt her deeply. She finally sticks up for herself and tells Miriam off as they're standing there. Elspeth has a tear running down her cheek because this is obviously upsetting for her. And she says to Raven, have you met my stepmother, Captain? I whispered, the remnants of my anger distilled in a single tear that fell to my cheek. Lovely woman. The same callous thumb that slid over my knuckles in Raven's chamber caught the tear on my cheek, dragged it away. It was gone in a moment. I just like the fact that he's so gentle with her. He's known to be a very severe man, but is very gentle with her. That's a soft spot for me, honestly, in any bit of writing. I love that kind of dynamic. Raven tells her that she handled her stepmother well, and then asks if she's always this cruel to her. And Elspeth is more or less so. This is my daily interaction with that wretched woman. So they arrive at the cellar finally, and Raven warns her that this experience won't be pleasant because she's asked to be informed of everything that's going on, but that knowledge is a double-edged sword. Inside the room is Jesper, Elm, Philic, and then Fenir and Moret. Fenir and Moret are Raven's parents. So the whole shebang, the whole crew is in this room. And so in order for her to be properly filled in, she has to be questioned to prove that she's worthy of that information. Chapter 11, that's where we're at. Elspeth agrees to their questions and whatever she's going to have to endure to prove that she's worthy of the truth. She'll need to choose which Providence card is to be used against her in order to get her to speak the truth. So her choices are the Scythe, the Chalice, or the Nightmare. The Nightmare in her head tells her to choose the scythe. Elm is the owner of the scythe, so he's the one that will tap into the power to get her under its influence. Elm uses the scythe on her, and to make sure that he's got her under his control, he makes her like punch herself or slap herself in the face a few times, to which Raven gets irritated by, and everybody's like, dude, cut it out, like we get it, she's under your control. But remember, Elm is like a spiteful little brat and he doesn't trust her. So he's like, I just need to make sure, like I had her under my control, guys. I'm like, chill, come on, I'm just having some fun here. Philip asks her about her magical abilities. Remember, that's Philip is the physician. Philip asks her again if she has any other magical abilities besides being able to see the Providence cards. And she hesitates, and Raven notices. Forgive me, Miss Spindle, but you do not have the appearance of someone trained in combat. It might have been luck knocking Elm off his feet, he said, shooting his cousin a wry grin, but not me. Do you have any other magic? So she wants to be honest, but she just really can't reveal her true power yet. And so she asks the Nightmare for his help, and the Nightmare is able to like loosen the ropes of the scythe's magic, which allows her the freedom to say no. So remember, the scythe is the scythe is basically like it manipulates you into wanting to do whatever the card holder is trying to convince you to do. Raven is suspicious of her because he can almost see like the change in her when he notices. He's like, okay, she's broken through the scythe's power. So he's suspicious of her, but he's not going to force her to admit to something quite yet. And then I think he asks her again about her ability to do to combat. And she says that like she was never trained in combat, that she trained herself. And so I think this is one of the Elspeth not such bright, smart moments, because it's very clear that a girl with her physique and background would not be able to fight off like trained soldiers, warriors, if you will. Kind of a plot hole. It's not really a plot hole though, because everybody's calling BS on her lies. Moret, which is Raven's mother, asks if she swears to keep this information that they're about to share with her to herself. Now able to lie, though, because she broke through the scythe's power, Elspeth chooses not to lie, and she swears solemnly that she would keep all of this information to herself and not tell another soul. I kind of like that, the integrity of that. Like, I'm not being manipulated into keeping this all secret. Like, I'm deliberately choosing of my own free will. Yes, I will keep this information secret. Elm tells her that the king is 2 cards short of acquiring the full deck, that he needs the infected blood to complete the ritual, and he's going to use Emery as a sacrifice. I explained that earlier. So they're going to commit treason in order to save Emery. Fenrir says that there's more to tell about the situation. However, they won't share all that information here in Stone Castle. They'll talk about it at Castle U, which is their estate. If Elspeth agrees to help them, then she'll be able to find a cure for herself too. Elspeth agrees that with her ability to see the Providence cards, she will help them find the Twin Alders card, because that's the one that nobody's been able to find yet. That's the big bad boy. Chapter 12. So the council kicks Elspeth out into the hallway where they deliberate if she's trustworthy enough to become part of their little gang. So she's out in the hallway arguing with the Nightmare in her head. She makes a note to the Nightmare, like, why didn't you ever mention that the scythe doesn't work on you? And then he tells her that apparently none of the cards have an impact on him. Like, he can't be influenced by any of them. And she's like, well, you never told me that. And he says, but I have mentioned it. My clueless little companion, his claws grated his teeth. I cannot, however, be held responsible for your feeble comprehension. He has admitted to her before that the cards have no influence on him, which I think is a dead giveaway to one of the twists in the book. But I think that obviously the author did that on purpose, but because at this point, we're still kind of wondering, like, who is this Nightmare guy? Like, what the heck? She's exhausted at this point, so she just drops the argument with him. Is like, whatever. So she decides that she's feeling a little impatient and nosy, and so she puts her ear up to the door and starts listening to hear what they're all saying. She overhears them agree to let Elspeth in, and they're talking about bringing her to the U Castle for her to, be able to participate in like the highwayman shenanigans that are going to have to take place. Like, it would be easier if she was living with them to make this plan work. But in order to get her to come to the castle, they need a good excuse. Because remember, she's like a 20-year-old woman, unmarried. How are they going to form a good enough excuse to get her to go live with them? Jesper says that she has an idea. What if we tell Eric Spindle and the Hawthorns that we've invited Elspeth to stay at Castle U so that you might court her? And she's directing this at Raven. Raven is not thrilled by this idea, but if it's all for show, then therefore he's like, I suppose I could put up the facade of basically us fake dating in order to get Elspeth to convincingly come live at Castle U. Fenrir calls him out and says, like, what's so bad about this like fake dating situation? Elspeth is very clever and she's striking. Like, it's not, it's not like a big burden on him or anything. Not a bad deal, son. It's not that bad. Raven says, make no mistake, she's beautiful. Only Raven's voice cut out. Then, as if the words were bitter in his mouth, if the ruse will help, he heaved a sigh. I'll try. Though I doubt I'll play a convincing suitor. So the council agrees that they will basically say that Raven and Elspeth are courting. They will talk to Eric Spindle and get his approval, and bada bing, bada boom, we're out the door. Raven goes to get Elspeth and he opens the door up, and she can't scoot away from the door fast enough, so she ends up like losing her balance, falling on the floor, and he just like looks at her and he's like, his face is like, I know that you were just listening in on this conversation and I'm not even gonna reprimand you for it because whatever at this point. How much of that did you hear? And she's like, I heard the gist of it. And he's like, okay, well, will you agree to it? Like, I know it's not the most great thing, but it's probably the most convincing thing that we could do. And she's like, sure. So she agrees to it. They decide that they need to make an appearance before leaving the festivities. Raven and Elspeth are going to go back up to the festivities as a couple. Then after about an hour or so, everybody's going to skedaddle towards U Castle. This will also give Fenrir and Morit a chance to speak to Eric Spindle and get that fake dating courtship thing figured out. As they're heading back upstairs to the festivities, Raven tells her that Emery is dying. He's degenerating at an alarming rate at this point, and he's dying. So this is why the king has chosen him as the blood sacrifice to unite the deck of cards. He thinks that it will save Emery from a long, painful degeneration. In some ways, Raven is grateful to the king because instead of having him be killed flat out, he chose to keep Emery alive, which, I mean, sure, but ultimately the king still, like, he kept Emery alive because he's, like, going to use him for his own purposes, so, not super noble. Raven explains to her that they're kind of on a time crunch here because if they want to save Emery, they have to unite the deck of cards before the winter solstice, because Emery's magic flares with the shift of seasons. The old Book of Alders says that the deck should be united during the darkest part of the year, and Emery may not survive another year. Raven's telling her all this as they're heading up to like go see Emery. They reach Emery's room, find that he is not in the room, he's gone. Chapter 13. Raven and Elspeth rush off to find Emery, like he can't have gotten too far. In their mad dash, they run headfirst into the king and his other destriers. So Raven puts up this really cool facade and tells the king that he's escorting Miss Spindle to the gardens. They dodge any further conflict or questions and continue on their way. Elspeth ends up finding Emery in the crowd of partygoers. He's gotten himself into a altercation with two men that have White Eagle cards. Apparently, Emery pickpocketed them and now they want their money back. Raven tries to de-escalate the situation, but the one man demands his coin back and takes a swing at Raven, and Raven's like, cool, I'm down. Raven shoves Emery out of the way and he brawls with these men. Elspeth asks Elm, because Elm has shown up at this point, like, why aren't you jumping in to help? And he's like, it's best to let the captain blow off some steam. Like, he's having fun with this, so I'm just going to stand back and watch. Elspeth realizes that Emery's strange behavior that he has isn't because he's drunk, it's because he's degenerating. And so he's like gradually losing his mind. She asks Elm what his power was, and he tells her that he has the ability to read people with a single touch. So this goes back and explains how he was able to see the golden eyes and whatnot when he told Elspeth basically like a prophetic type word. So she's like, oh, that explains that really crazy interaction. So here's a little tidbit. Elm tells her that Emery mentioned Elspeth to him and said that he was excited when he met Elspeth because now he met someone else infected like him besides his brother. The captain of destriers, oh, this word, is also infected. The king has kept all of these people, all these infected people alive for his own gain. Interesting. And Raven ends up beating the men that were trying to fight with Emery. He ends up taking their was it the white horse? Their cards, the cards they have. I don't know. I guess I was like faintly confused by that. I'm like, I guess so if you defeat somebody, you can just take their cards. I don't know. He takes the cards. Chapter 14. Elspeth is now fired up about finding out that Raven is also infected. And so she marches up to him. She jabs her finger into his chest. She's like, I know what you are, and you've lied to me. Elm goes to take Emery back to his room so that way Raven and Elspeth can clear this miscommunication up. Elspeth tells Raven that she's not a fan of his lies of omission, but at the same time, she's doing the same thing. Raven admits he's infected and that the king knows. Certain cards cannot be used against Raven. Likewise, he cannot use certain cards. When he became like a trainee as a destrier, he could not use certain cards, which is how the king found, or no, I'm sorry. The king didn't find out he was infected. Prince Hoth found out he was infected, and then Prince Hoth ended up telling the king about it. The king ended up keeping him alive for some reason, and then made him the captain of Destroyers. I think we get more of an explanation on that later on in the story, but anyway, I digress. Raven tells her, like, this is really not the best time or place to be having this very intricate discussion. So he's like, why don't we get you back to Castle U and I can tell you more when we're safely away from so many ears. Raven and Elspeth go back onto the dance floor and they end up sharing like a first dance together. He takes her hand and he reminds her, we're supposed to be courting, so let's go dance and give everybody in here like a good view of us together, so that way our lie is very convincing. So yeah, the dance allows everyone to get a good look at the pretend lovers. The plan is set in motion. Then we head into part 2, which is The Mist, chapter 15. So Elspeth's family agree to the courtship, though they're a little bit surprised by it because it was just like so out of the blue. They take a carriage ride to Castle U, and it is a silent, frosty, tense ride, as Elspeth is still livid with Raven for keeping the fact that he's infected to himself. Once inside the creepy castle, Raven escorts her to her room, and he admits that he did not mean to be unfeeling, only that he keeps parts of himself hidden for so long that he doesn't quite know how to talk about them himself. And he asks her if she can at least understand that. And I was like, well, she most definitely can. She said, I could better than most. Hadn't I hidden my ability to absorb Providence cards from Raven from the very start? Hadn't I lied to his family and told them I could see Providence cards when, in truth, the 500-year-old monster in my head was doing that for me? I carried my own lies by omission, kept my own secrets, dark, dangerous secrets, which perhaps was why Raven enraged me so deeply. It was easier to hate him for being secretive and dishonest than admitting I hated myself for the same reasons. I appreciate the self-reflection, the character growth. She can't muster a very civil response to him, and so instead she bitterly reminds him that his household is private, therefore they no longer need to pretend to be in a courtship. Raven just kind of like stays silent at this point that she's made, because she wants him to say like, no, I want to pretend to court you, or she wants him to admit that that he has feelings for her, you know, whatever. Anyway, she puts up a facade that she like doesn't give a rip. Obviously this whole thing is fake, and even though she's heard him say that he thinks that she's beautiful, and she herself finds him very beautiful, handsome, whatnot. So Elspeth goes into her room, goes to bed. She wakes up the next morning from having a very strange dream that she can't remember. It's like, she wakes up, she knew that she had a dream, but it's like fleeting and she can't recall what it was about. She takes note of the decor of her room and notices that there's like a repeating imagery of this man in golden armor that's kind of everywhere. Like he's on the carpet, and she ends up seeing him like all throughout the house. And she's like, who's this character that I keep seeing pictured all over the place? And as she's sitting there wondering this, Jesper comes and knocks at her door, and she's got her trunk with all her belongings and a letter from her aunt. She asks Jesper who this like strange gold knight type figure she keeps seeing everywhere. Jesper tells her that he's supposedly the Shepherd King, and that they have a lot of his likeness around the castle. And so she's like, oh, interesting. Like the Shepherd King's kind of just lore, like a legend. Jesper tells her that she's come to get her for kind of a very purposeful mission, if you will. Sylvia Pine and her daughters are stopping by the castle, and they will be joining them for like tea time or something. Now, the reason why this is a big deal is because the Pines aren't well liked. However, it's likely that Sylvia's husband has an Iron Gate card, and this may be their best way to get the intel as to where they can snatch this card from him. So chapter 16, Elspeth hates this scenario that she's been plopped into. However, she like rises to the occasion, and she works very efficiently at steering the conversation with Sylvia and particularly her two daughters, into the direction of the Providence cards, and gets the daughter to admit that her father has a prophet and the Iron Gate card. And they're like, interesting, do tell more. After this tea time interaction, the Pines leave. Jesper rushes off to tell Raven and Elm about the cards that Wayland, what's his last name? Wayland Pine owns. They can make plans to get that card. Fenrir, Moret, and Elspeth sit down at a table, and they start talking about some lore about the kingdom. So the previous kings of Blunder have all tried to unite the deck of cards, but none have been successful because none have been able to find the Twin Alders card. The only documents that speak of the Twin Alders card is the Old Book of Alders and the history of Brutus Rowan, the first Rowan king. According to the legend, the Shepherd King took the Twin Alders card into the mist and returned without it. So no one's actually seen this card. The Nightmare doesn't like any mention of King Brutus. So that note is interesting to Elspeth. Though a lot of this stuff is considered legend, the Nightmare's reaction to these kind of information is like very visceral. So it's like, is it a legend, or is it just like viewed as a legend today, but because it's been brushed under the rug, or it's been treated as a legend or lore and not to be taken as gospel? Elspeth mentions, she's like, well, you know, the Shepherd King guy would probably have his own history and documents to go off of, right? And Fenrir's voice was grave. Most of what we know of the Shepherd King we take from lore. His histories were destroyed and none of his children survived to claim the throne. Brutus Rowan and his captain of the guard became the next king of Blunder. So apparently the Shepherd King like was a real king, but his history has been lost. Some people think he's real and some people think he's made up. Elspeth then asks Fenrir and Moret, like, okay, if we're trying to save Emery, whose infected blood are we going to use to unite this deck of cards? And then that's when Fenrir tells her that Orith Willow, the king's head physician, is also infected. And this revelation is just a freaking bomb goes off for Elspeth. And she's like, what the heck? You're kidding me. The man that's been going around ordering the death of like hundreds of children is also infected. As I said before, the king keeps infected people alive that serve his purposes. They show Elspeth their collection of cards minus the ones that Elm and Raven use. They tell her we still need the Well card, the Iron Gate, and the Twin Alders card. So then she asks them if they have a plan for acquiring the Well card, because if they don't already know where one is, she knows somebody down the street that has one. Very nice, very handy. Way to come in clutch there, girlfriend. This leads us up to chapter 17. This is like about the halfway point of this book. I'm going to pause my review here because I have a really hard time summarizing books in a timely fashion. So I'm going to break this up into 2 parts again. I apologize. Here's the halfway point. I'm going to pause it here and we can finish discussing this in my next video. In my next video, like once I finish the actual review of the book in its entirety, then I'll talk more about what I liked in the book and what I didn't like in the book. Altogether though, I felt like the first half of this book was good. Like I cruised through it pretty quickly. And again, like I feel like the reason why I struggle so much to summarize the book is because it felt like something pertinent happened. Something pertinent was happening in each chapter that helped push the story along further. Obviously, as I'm talking about it, I can see like a few points where the plot holes kind of are and stuff probably could have been explained a little better or fleshed out a little bit more. This isn't like a super thick, hefty book. It's only just under 400 pages. So sometimes I feel like if you want stuff really, really fleshed out, if you want the lore like really well defined, sometimes you got to read like a really hefty high fantasy book that takes the time to build a world that heavily. But as for more of like a romantasy, I don't know, I guess I can kind of like give it a pass. Things that I did genuinely noticeably pick up on that I liked was just like the banter between Raven and Elspeth. I thought it was good. Thank y'all so much for joining me. I'm gonna let April sit there like a little lump on a log because she's content. We'll see you guys all in the next one. Toodles!